Good morning again, everybody. Now we're coming to this peak of all this yesterday afternoon discussions and this morning to speak now about integration. When we're talking about integration, so this session is called From Megacities to Villages, Integrated Approaches to Meeting Energy Needs. So what we clearly see is when we're talking about transforming the energy system, an energy sector, and building on integrated renewable energy-based systems, this is really a serious undertaking which has many, many implications at the political, institutional, organizational level. And we'd like to talk about how we can really make this happen to meet all energy demands, actually, from the villages to megacities and also in the different end-use sectors. So it's building on the discussion of these last hours. We focus specifically on the needs at the policy, institutional, and industrial levels to build up a robust and systemic approach. And actually, I'm super excited to have a panel here representing all these different needs. Just to start with, Sarah from Selco could unfortunately not join us, but we found a super representative who's replacing her. And this is Octavio from the World Resource Institute, sorry. Octavio Molina, he's the Energy Efficiency Coordinator at World Resource Institute Mexico, but has particular experiences on decentralized distributed energy systems in a city level, but also in villages. Next to him, there is, and I'm really sorry, these papers. Harry Andriantavi, who was the Executive Secretary for Rural Electrification Agency in Madagascar, but is the Executive Director of Club ER, which is the African Rural Electrification Agencies. So here we basically have the decentralized side. Moving now to the other edge, which is megacities, with Irene Skula, who is coordinating the clean energy program actually at C40. And Marijke van Staden, who's a renewable energy director at ICLE. I think I am. And then we move to what is the infrastructure which is underlying, with Ron Banyev, who is responsible for the international programs of the National Renewable Energy Labs. We have quite a short time. We're starting a bit late, so I will again use my best friend, this clock, and invite you actually to have some starting statements. And we thought that since we spoke very much about the energy sectors and the smaller decentralized energy systems, we'll start now with the other edge, and Irene Skula, to give us a bit of a perspective on what you're doing on the C40 side and megacity side to increase basically renewable energy uptake, in particular also in an integrative way. Irene.
Thanks, Rana. Good morning to all. So you already know that around 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions come from cities worldwide. And specifically in cities, energy is used in all places, buildings, transport, solid waste management, everywhere. And the majority of the emissions, unfortunately, comes from buildings. So the majority of our cities have already set clear decarbonization targets for being carbon neutral by 2050, but we know that they cannot achieve these trajectories without decarbonizing their energy supply. So while we recognize that cities cannot do this alone because they need to work strongly and closely with national and state authorities, utilities and regulators have to play a very central role to this, they do have an essential role by leading by example, and that's what we do in C40. They can create market signals, and by setting these goals, they give the path and the pathway to reach these difficult decarbonization goals. So one of the key actions that the mayors can do is, first of all, use renewable energy systems on their own municipal assets, aggregate demand to purchase clean energy, and support centralized and decentralized clean energy production. They can also incentivize building scale renewables by their citizens, by creative incentive programs, and also, and most importantly, reduce the energy demand. We need to work also very closely with energy efficiency to achieve a clear decarbonization path. I would like to highlight also hear the co-benefits of the clean energy pathway, because this is essential for our cities. By choosing clean options, you reduce the air pollution-related health issues in cities if you remove dirty vehicles, if you also close down fossil fuel power plants. You also create jobs, local jobs. In the United States, I think now the clean energy industry employs more people than the traditional energy industry, which is very, very, very important. Of course, there are financial benefits related with clean energy options, and the return on investment can be very beneficial and profitable for the private investors and the city itself. So we need to make the language simple, communicate the right message, and never forget to highlight the co-benefits of our climate actions. Because at the end of the day, it's not only tackling climate change, but also helping all the levers of government and all the actors involved progress towards this direction.
Thank you very much, Irene. So maybe over to you, Marijke. You're representing also the megacities, but in your network you also have other types of cities which might face other challenges and opportunities. So what is your perspective on that?
Thanks, Rana. Well, indeed, everything Irene says is relevant to most cities around the world. ICLEI works with megacities, but also with villages. We work with local governments. And the local government is the entity that actually is our client, where we would want to understand what do they need, and do they understand the transition and the need for decarbonizing their energy systems. Now, typically, at the city level, you do not have a lot of mandates around energy, but you have other mandates which can actually be very helpful. We work not only with the local government level, but also with national governments to try and get these integrated discussions and dialogues going, that the national governments do not just decide top-down what is necessary, but that they also try and hopefully listen to the needs from the local level. The secondary cities, the fast-growing cities around the world, have at the moment massive influx of population and unplanned system development. So there's a huge demand for service delivery, huge demand for energy, housing, transport, and it's very challenging to plan this in these fast-growing cities. So what we ask local governments to do is map and explore what you think your growth trend would be, and then you assess where are your current policies and what are your gaps, really looking practically and pragmatically at having a clear scenario in terms of growth, understanding what your growing energy needs would be, and then fill that vacuum, ideally with renewables. Set a very clear, coherent target, ideally 100% renewables. Even if you don't know how to get there, if you've set the target politically, you can step by step understand and plan how to get there. You need to work with your businesses, you need to work with your citizens. This is not something you do in isolation as a level of government. This is a stakeholder evolution that has to take place. But the local governments indeed are well positioned to speak and inform and raise awareness of citizens, which is really needed in this space because renewables are not at all understood by the normal citizen, the normal business, and even industry struggle to see how renewables can serve them. So we need clear, factual information that hopefully also comes from groups like REN21, ICLEI C40 and others to make sure that the information is clear and concise, what is doable, what can be done, and what has to be done, stressing the urgency. I think the urgency of where we are now and where we need to be is not well presented by national governments, and indeed we also urge national governments to be clearer about this. We call on local governments to buy and operate utilities. If you own your energy systems that can provide services, you're in well positioned to deal with this. Looking at district energy, district heating and cooling, tri-generation, things that typically a local government wouldn't think about, but they now need to enter into the space to really understand. Map your local renewable energy resources to see, do you have enough for you achieving a 100% target? And if not, can your city work with the neighborhood cities or with the peri-urban or rural areas in the hinterland? Create this partnership space where you can unfold your 100% renewables. Very practical. We give tools, we give guidance, technical assistance, policy advice to the local governments, but also to their partners who work in this space. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Marijke. So, Harry, maybe from your side, you're basically a representative between the rural area, but also infrastructure at the rural electrification agencies. What are your thoughts on that? What can you do? What are you doing?
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Let me explain you our association before. CLABIA, or African Association for Electrification, is a technical network from and by national stakeholders in rural electrification. Our members are rural electrification agencies, rural electrification funds, and national stakeholders, national structures in rural electrification. Our objective is to improve rural electrification access through capacity building and knowledge management. And you know that the problem in Africa is we created rural electrification agencies, but the personnel in each agencies are public servants, and there are no skills, there are no capacity to discuss with developers, for example, and funders. So CLABIA try to develop some training, some capacity building to improve some capacity skills for them. And in the other hand, we try also to give some data for different actors. Yesterday and today, for example, you say that with our group Energy 2.0, you say that you need to have some data. And CLABIA, for example, since this year, try to set up some data for mini-grid, for example. And next year, in 2019, we try to develop one open source data with access level to share information on mini-grids. Secondly, we try also to have different partnership with some actors. For example, we are the member of REN21, and we need also to have a partnership with Africa-led partnership, and we encourage our members to use, for example, Odyssey energy solutions. I think that it's necessary to develop some capacity building and to share some data.
Thank you very much, Harry. Now, Octavio, you'll be improvising, but luckily we already spoke very much the last hours, and you also have this background to take part in this discussion. So what is your perspective on?
Yeah, I will talk a little bit of my organization, in which we have internationally a project in energy access. We actually, right now, we are working with Kenya, Tanzania, and India. And we have a microgrid investment accelerator, in which we use an energy access investment maps and to allocate this financial aid. And some of the main drivers are the health, education, and the production. And we in WRI, we are supporting these local communities with the projects that will help to improve the quality of life of local communities. So, from my personal background and experience, in Mexico, I I went to do research into 7 indigenous communities, in which I got a very clear message from these communities, because we thought that we were going to go to help them in some way and to improve their lifestyle, but because we sometimes think that we are the ones that know the truth and that we are more, in some way, more evolved. But what I got from these communities, especially from the Mazawa community in the state of Mexico, it was that, when we arrived, we thought that they doesn't have roads, and they doesn't have cars and cell phones, and so we thought that they were like in some way underdevelopment, no? But after talking with them and then knowing their necessities, they told us like, we don't need cars, we don't need cell phones, because everything is local. Like if I want to talk with my friend, with my family member, I just have to walk to like some houses, and I have this interconnection and this sense of community in which everyone is aware of everybody. And it's amazing in that way that we, instead of having the technology, we sometimes do not hear or see the other lifestyles. So they told us like, we are rich in natural resources. We follow the natural cycles of the earth to harvest. So we live in a very sustainable manner. So you should be the ones to learn from us, and to in that way, right now, we can adapt that into the cities. So by creating new models and decentralized sub-centers in the cities, that we will have the energy production and food production, and to create community. I think it's one of the main things that I can give you as a message from these Mexican communities. So.
Thank you very much, Octavio. I think we've heard many discussions, actually, in particular in this Energy System 2.0, that it's about energy in a more socio-economic and political background also. So that's probably underlying this too. So the idea is we have worked on the energy needs from the sectoral perspective. So heating, transport, and energy, so decentralized distributed systems in particular. And I would like to bring my rapporteurs here to the scene to quickly hear what has been worked on specifically on the needs from the sector side towards the overall energy systems. What is needed to have a more integrated approach? On the heating, yes. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Thank you. I was wondering, why are they staring at me? And I thought, like, it's really weird. Ron, I am so sorry. So, Ron Benioff, and he'll get 2 extra minutes.
I think the message is it's all about markets, and we've got the research problems licked, which not quite the case. But what is NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab in the U.S., doing in this space? There's sort of three main things. Our bread and butter is about 2,000 employees, the world's largest dedicated renewable energy and energy efficiency laboratory, that are doing research, both fundamental and applied research, on the range of renewable energy technologies for electricity, for heat, for other productive use, but very importantly also on the enabling technologies, on the grids of the future, on mini-grids, on better controllers and voltage regulation, on advanced vehicles that integrate renewable fuels, efficient design, electricity, on buildings of the future. And And a very exciting new area of research, which I think is really fascinating, and this is on electrons to molecules. As the cost of renewable energy gets down to very low levels, below 2 cents a kilowatt hour in good locations, we can now actually generate chemicals and fuels directly from renewable electricity and become a primary driver of pathways for chemical intermediaries and for gas, and that's absolutely critical. Secondly, the lab does a lot of work on data analysis tools to support policy decisions, economic analysis, grid optimization, building optimization. And third, we have programs, robust programs of support to countries and to subnational governments, states and cities, and businesses. And this includes incubators, which is critical to support emerging entrepreneurs, piloting of new technologies. Now, what's needed going forward? I think going forward, we have to double down on our investment in the enabling technologies that will achieve this transition. So big investments in energy storage, big investments in much better management and efficient management of the grid and forecasting and grid controls and design of mini grids, and on these new pathways for productive uses and for conversion of electrons into chemicals, renewable electrons into chemicals and fuels. Secondly, I think support for emerging markets is essential. So we need to identify kind of where are the best opportunities for renewable heat and renewable transport, other productive uses, and really invest in the policy design, the market structures, but also pilot projects and support for the entrepreneurs in these systems to really have champions that others can learn from, which leads to the third element, which we've all talked about, and I'm just re-emphasizing, is we need to identify and share good practices amongst these champions and create sustained networks. I think meeting here is great, but we need to have ongoing networks at the regional level, because these are really localized issues, localized solutions that we sustain, to have ongoing peer exchange, advisory support, learning and case studies. We offer advisory support, glad to participate, and I'd really strongly recommend that we invest in such sustained regional networks. And then a final point, we need to pay attention to the transition. There's some winners and losers. There's incumbent technologies here. We need to think about how to manage the transition, how to partner where we can with the gas industry, for example, because the solutions won't be exclusively renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron, and apologies again. So we're moving now to the part which I have announced 5 minutes ago. Now, so Bärbel Epp will explain us what you have spoken about in the heating and cooling, in the heating session. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, we had a very small group. We had a small group, actually, but a very diverse group and nice discussions. Yesterday we learned that we speak too much about it depends and if and buts. So this morning we try to be without that. And since you cannot read really our final conclusions, I will read them out for you. The first one was that we said among this circle, which shows the 3 sectors, we should really include efficiency. We should always think about energy efficiency as sort of the 4th wheel on this driving vehicle. And in the recommendations, we started that think carefully what you really want to integrate. Not all factors are very nice. You know, in some ways it was said that electricity is too valuable to shower with it. And a lot of countries has difficulties with their grid, electricity grid, because too many people shower with electricity. So be careful and assess carefully what you want to integrate. Generally, the heat sector feels closer to electricity, to integrate with electricity than with transport. We had difficulties to feel or have ideas on how integration with transport should work. And so this was this part here. Then we said that what we really need, and what is sort of a new idea, not really understood yet, is the smart heat grid. So, I mean, we all know smart electricity means you measure, you know exactly where your consumers are, you maybe turn down some power plants, but the intelligent heat grid is not really understood, but must be seen as something very important as well for transition. This sort of works a bit with this one here, where it says, what will the smart heat grid look like? So this is sort of a sector need, which really needs R&D, needs case studies and investments on this part. We were very clear in that the heat sector has to have a homework first, which we made here at recommendations, and this is we have to work on transparent costs. As long as the renewable heat sector is not really able to say what are our precise yields and what are the precise costs, we are really difficult to be integrated into other business models. So this is the homework here. Then overall, we understood that policies are needed to make deployment faster in renewable heating technologies because we need to scale up and bring costs down. And this one is also important, which we made under sector needs. You know, what we can offer the other sectors is the cheapest thermal storage. And this needs to be understood by all sectors that thermal storage is sometimes 30, sometimes 50 times cheaper than electricity storage. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much, Bärbel. Okay, so we're jumping not to transferred, but to distributed renewables with William Brandt.
Thank you. Thanks, Rana. William Brandt from Power for All. Our group looked at integration of distributed renewable energy, and the focus was primarily around electrification. We looked at, talked mostly about mini grids and solar home systems, rooftop solar, not so much about cooking solutions or mobility or things of that sort, and largely in the rural electrification context. So just as background, in terms of the sector needs that we looked at, you know, essentially four things. Around, I'm just going to talk about the sector needs and not summarize the rest. Really longer term thinking in terms of how to best integrate these solutions. Right now you have a very near-term approach. There's a binary view of the sort of centralized solutions and decentralized solutions, public versus private. We need to step back and look at the overall picture in a more holistic way and plan for that in a longer-term way that includes a significant role for the private sector. We need more support for market structures and policies. Right now, it's very unclear in many national policy environments exactly what the role is for distributed energy solutions. That needs to be much more clear and supportive. There's continues to be a lack of capacity to actually meet the growing demand for these distributed energy solutions actually on the ground. So you're seeing a growing skills gap and capacity gap that needs to be addressed, as well as a shortage of good data on which to make decisions, and the sharing of knowledge once that data is collected amongst different players. And then lastly, standardization continues to be a major challenge for scaling distributed solutions. And so there's a need for more harmonization of standards across the board, whether that's technical standards, you know, tariffs or standards that govern tariffs, et cetera. So those are the four main points that we discussed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, William. And transport. Hannah is coming to present transport.
And I was told that people cannot be seen by the camera, so I'm just going to put Hannah here. Okay. And then I'll make sure that you guys can see.
So you won't be hidden forever.
Okay, so then in transport today, we were covering a lot of different topics, but narrowed it down finally to the main things that the sector needs to implement are integrating more electricity, but also more infrastructure is necessary. more data and knowledge about transport use so that we can better serve the needs and reduce demand. Tax systems for renewable fuels, so thinking outside of just electricity, and common and similar policies across jurisdictions, so more coordination from city to city or across borders. In terms of the top recommendations to ensure sector integration, I've forgotten the implications for other sectors, is the potential to aid variable renewable electricity. So, I mean, providing balancing services to the power sector. And going to the top recommendations, it's the integrated planning and low carbon transport and electricity. So getting more speaking about transport needs in renewable energy planning more broadly. Also thinking about supply and demand. So this also incorporates a behavioral change aspect. So shifting the way that people are using transport currently, and optimizing available transport options. And finally, enabling policies. So this is also kind of bringing in the carbon pricing aspect again, as this would also help decarbonize the sector. And finally, the suggestions for the RIN21 community. A big one was facilitating conversation between actors and better communication across stakeholder groups, and tracking the integration of transportation and planning.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Okay, I'm going to try to get the second mic back here on scene, please. Thank you. And would like to give our panelists the opportunity to respond to this. Basically, when we're really looking at the sectoral needs, I'll start with the infrastructure part, because this is obviously, I mean, very often the grid is our reference point. We're talking about energy demands, which are very various and are not only about electricity. What are your thoughts from the infrastructure side? What can we do to really respond to these diverse demands and the sectoral needs to make it better?
Yeah, I guess several thoughts. One is, I think we really need to pay attention to the services that we're providing and the different forms of energy carriers that those services have, whether it's in gaseous form for heat, or services being provided in terms of chemicals or other fuels. And so really think about investing in tailored delivery of materials, of products, and storage, different forms of storage, as was highlighted. And the renewables have certain attributes in terms of thermal storage, and electric storage that we really need to invest further in. And then I think one of the biggest challenges really is to come together as a community and have a shared vision of what are the different pathways that can meet energy services for heat, for transport, for distributed productive uses, and what are the conditions under which those pathways are most effective. Because it's such a confusing and complex landscape that right now when we talk about renewable heat, I think we all have a somewhat different view of what that means. And until we can coalesce kind of our visions a little bit and come up with some categories of different pathways in different contexts and the enabling technologies and the infrastructure, I think it'll really be difficult to get policymakers excited and to take action.
And so concretely, I mean, if as a community, how do we get policymakers excited? I mean, it's very interesting. We have the different communities, and we need to foster exchange here. We also see that it's not always easy to bring, for instance, energy people to transport events, transfer people to energy events. Only as an example, cities and energy people together. How can we do this? How can we do this better? What do we need to overcome?
Well, I think silos have been popping up as a topic since we started. I think the silos also exist because people do not actually communicate beyond their particular little mental space. And I think we need to create the space, both at the ministerial level and start looking at energy. And the systems change requires everybody on board to be, first of all, to understand what does the systems change mean, and how to unpack it for their particular ministries or departments or their action areas. And then indeed, as Ron said, jointly develop co-design a new concept. I think this is urgently needed in all sectors, in all spaces. The sectoral challenge we have at the moment perpetuates the silo thinking. And I think if we take what is now urgently needed, in my view, is planning. Get the right people together in the room who are the most powerful decision makers you can get in a country space, which would include national government, also other levels of government, industry, and businesses, to design something together. We're not creating that space for them. And I think the decision makers have not got the facts to make the right decisions at the moment. So we need to push and pull and prod to create that space. And indeed, NGOs have been calling for this for a long time, but NGOs are not the ones who are going to design the space. It will be eventually government. And we need to see leadership, and we need to see real leadership, and much more necessarily ambitious leadership in this space. I think this is where organizations like REN21, the Arenas of the World, and others can really make the space available and call and demand and insist on change. But I do see a bit too much passivity at the moment.
Okay, so maybe because you said like we need to bring the decision makers. Who are the decision makers? Who are the right decision makers to make this happen? Irene.
Well, I totally agree with Marijke that leadership is what is missing. So the decision makers are, let's say, multifold. So you have the national governments, the state governments, the local governments, or let's say the local policymakers, and the private sector, the industry, and the citizens. We should not neglect that. No policy on climate change, because this is the overall umbrella, not only renewables and accelerating renewables upgrade. You cannot plan without the citizens. The energy and all the services we're talking about, the end users are the people that live and live in cities, rural communities, all around the world. So why do we want to tackle climate change? To prevent irreversible change on our climate that would have detrimental consequences. So you cannot plan without the end users. So I think, although we cannot ask the citizens to take the decisions for our pathways, we need to bring them into the game. So one of the things that I think REN21 and all the other organizations that work in the field can contribute to is clear messaging and better communication to all levels of society. And as we heard, the indigenous people in Mexico, you need to bring everyone into the game. And collaboration, better collaboration and breaking silos. This is very important to go ahead with any climate target or renewable target whatsoever.
Okay, thank you, Erin. I would like to go back to Octavio, because you said like there was a community basically where you would like to learn from. Apparently, they did have a much more integrated approach. So what were they doing right? What we might not be doing right in the energy debate?
Okay.
In terms of integration, actually.
Okay. So I think that, yeah, we will have two problems to solve. One is cities, and other one is communities, which is totally different, in which we have first to know the needs of these communities, to know their culture, and to integrate technologies that will, instead of creating new markets of consumerism, we have to focus on improving their quality of life. And that's a very complicated question, because what is quality of life? We will know quality of life is specifically for each type of community, because for this Masawa community, what I saw is that maybe they need some type of technologies in order to improve their harvesting, but in a natural way, without affecting their ecosystem, because they are they survive because of the conditions, because they have this balance that they preserve. And instead of us, that we have this sense of growing, and this never-ending growing, there's never a system that ever grows. Like, there's always a point of chaos. So the thing of these indigenous communities is that what they do is to preserve the equilibrium, so to the balance, because everything is at the end energy, even our food. So they return everything into a holistic cycle in which you preserve that state of the energy balance. So I think that we can transport it into our cities by creating these decentralized approaches and sub-centers inside the cities, and with the decentralized electricity, energy production, and also by producing our own food, or in some way also from all the waste that is being produced, we can also use it to produce energy through anaerobic biodigestion. So we have to find out which would be like the scale. No, I think that's one of the most important parts, to know which will be the scale to adapt these decentralized technologies, and in the most efficient and affordable way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Octavio. And now I'm coming back to Harry, because I thought that you would probably speak about quality of life. And now I imagine, Harry, you go back to your members, the rural electrification agencies, who apparently are lacking some skills and insights, and you talk to them about a more circular economy approach and quality of life. What do you think would be the reaction, and how can we bring such a debate there? Or is it really something we need to do? Can we do this?
I think the main issues with rural electrification agencies is about the understanding of rural electrification, energy access, and renewable energy. It's not the same definition when you talk about it when you have rural electrification agencies at the left hand, and in the right hand we have the private company. You introduced since 2000 the public-private partnership strategy. But in fact, private have one sense of this strategy, and public also have is another. So I think you must to have a common definition, and after you can promote renewable energy. So when you, for example, with politicians, they need to have only lighting, for example, and they try to look for private sector to maintain, to operate some project in rural area. But for the private sector, it's a nonsense to have only lighting in rural electrification. So we need to manage this science.
And just a follow-up question on that, because basically the end-use sector, so I'll take the example of transport. Transport, in very often where you do not have energy access, there are also questions on access to transport. There are electric two-wheelers which are developing, there are good examples. Do you see that there is any space on the rural electrification side to use basically the needs in some of the other end-use sectors to increase the demand for electricity, and like this maybe are also allowed to have much more feasible economically approaches? Is there such a discussion?
Yes, certainly. Now, since 2, 3, 5 years ago, we introduced the mini-grid systems. And I think that you can have a big opportunity to develop renewable energy with this technology. And as you say, that you need to transport energy through different technologies.
Okay, thank you. So we have another speaker. Before I'm also giving you the opportunity to ask some questions so that we get also some movement in the room. Ruud Kempner is going to join us. He's a policy officer in the Renewable Energy Unit at the Directorate General Energy at the European Commission, and will explain us a bit how basically Europe moved from an energy framework to a cross-sectoral decarbonization framework. Ruud.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Very good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I've been listening indeed to the presentations of our speakers and the panelists and in the discussions this morning. So what I thought I'll do is I'll share with you a little bit of a perspective from the European Commission, from what is happening in Brussels. And for those which come outside of Europe, the European Commission essentially sets the regulatory framework on energy for all the EU member states. And lots of exciting things have been happening in Brussels. Now, in terms of the topic integration, I think the message has come through. The last 2 years in Brussels, the word integration has been mentioned anywhere and everywhere. And I thought I'll give you 3 examples of what is happening, but also give some experiences and insights from it associated with it. Because, of course, integration is a good thing, but how do you practically implement it? The first example which I wanted to give is that the European Commission in 2016 had to come up with new proposals in terms of energy policies. Instead of proposing a renewable energy policy, what they proposed is actually a package. So you propose renewable energy policy, you propose energy efficiency policy, but you also propose electricity market design proposals. The idea behind this is the idea of integration. If you want to do something on renewable power, you also immediately have to change your electricity market design because that has to reflect your higher share of renewable power in your electricity system. If you want to do renewable heating, you have to also change your buildings policies because renewable heating and buildings policies are related to each other. So this package as a whole was being established instead of individual policies. Great. Integration is going on. But of course, one of the flip sides of those things is that if you are negotiating this with member states, there are many, many variables and trade-offs. So what you see in practice, of course, is that member states are going to trade off certain aspects. Yes, I might want to have a higher target on renewable energy, but then I want to have less rules and regulations on the building sector. Yes, I might want to push support schemes for renewable power, but then I want to have more relaxed market design policies. And that's really the practical issue of this. Yes, integration, but of course it brings also some other issues associated with it. The other development is that so far EU member states had to report on their policies in terms of renewable energy, energy efficiency and climate, all in separate documentation. They've now decided, and this is only actually last week approved by the European Parliament, that each member state has to develop an integrated national energy and climate plan. Great, isn't it? We've listened to you all, and all member states are going to develop this national integrated energy and climate plan. They're developing it right now, and they have to submit it in December. One of the interesting aspects, and this is not a criticism, but something to reflect on, is that we get some member states coming back to Brussels and saying, well, we're in an election process, or well, we haven't formed a government yet. So we have the intention to develop an integrated national energy climate plan, but we can't do it yet. We haven't developed the policy yet. And one of the obligations which they have is also to talk with the regional countries around them to not only develop their own plan, but consider what the neighboring country is doing in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of renewable energy, in terms of climate policies. And again, some countries say, well, we can't communicate with our neighboring countries because they're in some kind of election program, some policies haven't been developed, they haven't done the impact assessment yet, so it can't be reflected in the integrated national and energy plans. So there you really not only have to think about how do you develop this integrated plan, but also how do you make that an iterative process so that it can develop over time. The third example which I wanted to give is the integration of energy and climate. Again, some exciting developments are going on because next week the European Commission is going to develop a new idea about what a long-term decarbonization strategy for Europe should look like. The last time that was developed was in 2011, so it's time that this one was updated. And again, one of the new approaches to this is that the previous long-term decarbonization strategy was developed in the kind of what you call ministries of energy and ministries of climate. This, again, has changed. So now the long-term decarbonization strategy is what they call commission-wide strategy. So that means that the people from the trade were engaged. That meant that the people from agriculture were engaged, that the people from environment were engaged, that the essentially ministries of economic affairs, which look at the industrial players, are being engaged. And so you're developing a communication and strategy which is integrated because all of those sectors need to play a role in both energy and decarbonization. But of course, it also opens up the room for lobbyists, for vested interests to try to implement and change these decarbonization strategies. On the one hand side, I think that's a natural thing to do because you have to look indeed in terms of the long-term decarbonization strategy. What are the winners? What are the losers? How do you kind of reconcile all of this in terms of your kind of long-term decarbonization and energy strategy plans? On the other hand, of course, you see there not a level playing field. Some people are more organized than others. And again, that's something which you have to take into consideration if you want to develop these integrated approaches. So lots of happening in terms of integration. I think the measures, at least in Europe, has come to the forefront. But at the same time, I wanted to share with you some reflections on kind of what does that actually mean in terms of what policymakers are doing and what then the people who have to draft these regulations, etc., have to consider. And if you want to know more, you can come to our workshop tomorrow.
Thank you, Ruud. Thanks for joining the panel. Maybe a quick follow-up question here, because we heard like reaching out to decision makers is very important. I think throughout the sessions we heard, okay, we need to shift thinking about it, etc. In the end, there are human decision makers. From your learning, what were the main barriers and what solutions did you find to make this new approach acceptable by decision makers or hearable? Does this need to be mandatory rules or?
No, well, in Europe at least, there's a general consensus idea that an energy transition, well, there are two things to it. There's a general consensus that at least an energy transition cannot be a national energy transition, but has regional implications. Renewables are simply more regional than the energy systems which we've used so far, which were essentially built on global flows of gas and oil and coal. There is a regional dimension to it, and that has to be reflected in the energy policies. At the same time, and I think that is relatively new, these new regulations and the policies which just have been adopted specifically recognize what they call local and renewable energy communities. So at the same time, a European policy, which essentially covers 28 countries, has in its regulation that all of these 28 member states have to look at renewable energy communities and what the implications are for renewable energy for them. So from that perspective, this policy at the same time broadened it, because we're looking at a European level, not just at a national level, and at the same time try to recognize this local level and the importance of that. So these two elements are kind of being developed simultaneously, widening and kind of closing it at the same time. And I think this is a relatively new development. And of course, it's also thanks to communities who have been kind of lobbying and kind of putting this to the forefront, saying renewable energy is something which is not only an issue which impacts energy security, which is a European thing, which not only affects trade, which is a European thing, but also affects like livelihoods, its cities and villages, etc.
Super, thank you, Ruud. And I think it's also responding to what you mentioned initially on the vertical integration, which is fundamental to better integrated approaches. Now, you can wake up for 10 minutes of Q&As to this wonderful panel. And Maike has a super innovative microphone, which is going to catch you, actually. Yes, throw it. Oh.
Sorry, I'll stand up. Gavin Wright from the International Windship Association. Just a couple of things, but it probably actually connects into one issue that I'd like to hear the panel's opinion on. We're talking about renewable energy. I think we should be talking much more about power and everything that power actually means. And one of the things that I've been hearing is coming into communities or having communities involved with new systems, new integrated, maybe democratized, decentralized systems. That has a dramatic impact on those communities. It can be incredibly disruptive on who is the actual owner of those systems, who is a winner, who is a loser. We see vested interests all over the place being affected by the change to renewable energy. And I'm just wondering how the panel feels those issues are actually being integrated into the development of these renewable energy systems and networks.
Okay, thank you very much. So now you are throwing it to the next person. Any other questions? And please be brief so that we have a bit more time. No questions, so you can choose to whom you throw it. Oh, there is one. Oh, sorry, Christopher, you were not, I didn't see you. These columns are not ideal.
Yeah, Christopher Dent, Edinburgh University. I'd just like to ask the panel what their understanding of renewable energy community is. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Over here.
Thanks to all the speakers for a very interesting panel. I just wanted to throw one word into the discussion when we talk about integration. Let's not forget to integrate the views of women also in this design effort. Because as we all know, women tend to be not as involved in many of the energy debates as they should be. Thanks God here it's different. This is already a wonderful way of modeling the changes that we need. But I think it still bears highlighting. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take two others if you're short, and then...
Thank you very much. I just wanted to bring again the issue of cooking energy services, because it was highlighted as one of the most urgent and important things to actually be addressing right now. But it's been quite not discussed in this forum, and I'm wondering what the role of renewable energies is actually with enabling or actually looking at the issue of cooking energy services in a more in a clean light. I mean, we really need to look at it in a way that we integrate not just renewable energies, but also the systems we integrate the people, the households, but also not the households, but also other sectors, because when you look at cooking, they focus so much on households that we forget you have institutions, we have, for example, within cities, which actually takes a very huge chunk of cooking and cooking energy services. So, I mean, the REN 21, as I think I would argue, as a very good place to begin to highlight this thing as an important issue and to come up with a model that is actually cost and benefit analysis that can actually serve the interests of the people, serve the interests of the environment, and also serve the industry interests. And I think it would be very, very nice leadership role coming from this kind of forums.
Okay, thank you. I suggest that we give you actually the opportunity to take to respond to these questions or some of them.
Thank you. I think on the first question, I think that's a really essential point about the fact that we have existing businesses, system operators, utilities that are delivering these services. And the only way that we will succeed as a community is by partnering with those businesses, with the utilities, with the folks who are managing transport fleets, the gas network, and very much have to bring them into this discussion. So I think if we're going to have a discussion like this in the future, that community should be here, because we can't view this as, oh, renewables are going to take over and supplant all the current market players. No, it has to be a partnership. We have to work with the gas industry, with the existing gas infrastructure, with the existing utilities and system operators. And I appreciate your making that point. I mean, I also agree very much with the point about looking at cooking. We need to be much more creative about renewable energy sources, solar sources, along with the investments in biomass, renewable generated gas, and pay much more attention. That's an area we haven't done the level of research and applied development needed.
Okay, actually what I'm going to do, just as a matter of time, is I will keep the microphone in my hand. And then I have Mareike, you'll tell me after a minute something like this. When we're done. This will force you to be super efficient and have really cool messages. Mareike.
So I think, point of women, they are part of the renewable energy community. I think we're all the renewable energy community, and certainly what we need to define is that the full ownership of renewables is taken by every single individual, organization, level of government, industry. That would make the world go bang. I think one of the points also to the first point, we need to democratize the energy system. If everybody can be an energy generator and contribute it to the local grid or to a swarm grid system, this would be wonderful, because then you'd have ownership and you could potentially make money off this, you could design new business concepts. But we do need stable policies, stable feed-in tariffs that actually remunerate fairly, making this an interesting and attractive opportunity. Anybody could then be an energy generator as well as an energy user. And I think this is the future that we need to talk about.
Thank you. And just in time, I'm really proud, and you should model her, actually, Octavio. Okay. Be as efficient. You're allowed to stand up, because otherwise I'm standing, okay, this is what that's a new rule now, you're standing up so that I don't stand in front of the other panelists. Your time is starting.
Okay, so I think that one of the first things that we have to solve about the off-site renewable energies is to create and be innovative in creating new technologies that are not disposable. So, because we are generating also another problem in those communities that maybe it could be very disruptive to create a consumer market, like that they will start to consume more electronics. And then what does the PV panels, what is going to happen after the end of the life cycle of it? So we have to start to think about how to create a very holistic cycle with the technology as well, and to minimize the impact, and to especially focus on improving the quality of life of that people.
Almost in time. Moving to Harry, actually. Here, come with me.
I have two things about human resources. I think that it's necessary to have a human resource with a good skills. And the second time is about REN 21 community. I think you need to open the membership to developers, because I'm not sure that developers will be too representative here. Thank you.
Okay, well, we gained 30 seconds, but I'm not giving you 30 seconds because you have a workshop tomorrow. No, but I'm going to take this mic because the rule is the same for you.
Okay. I think on reflection, and also on reflection of the questions, one of the critical issues in Europe was the name of the policy proposal. It was called Clean Energy for All Europeans, and that all Europeans added to it allowed us to talk about citizens, men and women. It allowed us to talk about renewable energy communities. It allowed us to talk about corporates which are interested in purchasing renewable energy. And this was a very powerful message which we could have used over the 2 years that this package has been negotiated. And it turned out actually one of the highly debated policy regulations was in self-consumption. So this issue to move to this all Europeans, to put citizens at the center of the energy policy, I think was one of the critical aspects in terms of what has been happening in Brussels over the last year.
Super, thank you. And the closing one for Irene.
The lights on me. So I liked very much the comment about women. So I would like to urge you to follow our Women for Climate campaign. It's for climate, not energy. But there is a program where we provide space for women, and we educate women also mainly in Global South to be part of the discussion and be well educated and transfer this knowledge not only to their household, but if they also have the chance to work in the place of work. So please follow that campaign. It's really focused on women. And another comment that I wanted to follow up with is about sustainable energy communities. I think from the aspect of the megacities, community energy projects are crucial because they can provide the space to deal with energy poverty and support low-income households and improve energy access. And justice is for all. We need to provide to support equity and social cohesion.
Excellent. And I'm pretty sure that this short time allowed us to really tap into super good ideas. I invite all of you to ask them more questions over lunch, which we'll have right in the room behind you, and to join me in an applause, which I'm not going to do with the mics, but to thank you for your insights.